go over adding some of the user interface elements to the pattern project that we created last week. So in the last lecture, we went over the basics of creating the interface elements. So now we'll look at how do we apply that to changing the pattern that we created in week 8. So I have my Sublime open. I'm just going to go to index.html first and add a new link. So we had pattern version 1. This is going to be pattern version 2. So I'll say list item class equals link and make a new anchor tag. And so I haven't actually created this folder yet, but we'll create it in a moment. So this is pattern underscore 2, and this will be pattern version 2. And then I'll just close the anchor tag and close the list item. And then I'll start the Sublime server. Looks like it's already started, so I'll just go ahead and open up my local host. So this is localhost 8080. And there's MMP 210, pattern version 2. So now we'll make the folder for that page. So I'm going to go back to the Finder. Here's some of my examples from last time. Just going to delete those and go to the desktop, go to MMP 210. So there's pattern 1. And just to kind of quickly remember, that was this pattern that we created last week. So I kind of did two things. I did like these characters, but I also did the sort of abstract pattern in the background. So you can really do one or the other. You don't have to do both, but you can kind of do whatever you want here, like a combination of different shapes, colors, if you want to do images, whatever you're inspired to do, as long as there's some sort of repeating pattern and variation involved. And so now what I want to do is I just want to give the user the ability to update the pattern, to save an image like we did in our example, but also to control some of the variations that they see in the pattern. So we'll go over each one of those steps. So I'm going to go to pattern 1 and I'm going to duplicate it. So I'm going to hit Command D and I'm going to say this is pattern underscore 2. And I'm going to just really quickly go to the DOM and grab the CSS style sheet from there, because I added some stuff in here to style the buttons that I may want to use again. So I'm just going to copy that style sheet instead of the other style sheet and just replace it. You can always like rewrite those styles or add new styles, but to make it a little faster, I'm just going to use the styles that I created before. So then I'll go back here and go to pattern version 2. And so it's still the same. We're going to add some stuff in there. So let's start just by adding in the button to create the new pattern and then save it. So this is kind of review because we did this in the DOM example, but we can just go over it real quick. So I'm just going to open sketch.js inside of pattern 2, make this a little bigger. And so last time we had this mouse pressed to regenerate the pattern. So instead of doing that, what we'll do is just add a button in here. So just real quick, we did this in the last lecture, but just to review. So if I want to make a new button, I need to create a variable and name it for what the button's going to do. So let's call this pattern button. And so I'm just going to say create button and add some text, new pattern. Okay, that makes that button down there. And so these colors actually don't match my sketch, but that's okay. I could kind of make them a little more generic. So maybe I'll go to style.css and instead of like blue and plum, those are pretty bright colors. I'll go for something a little bit more generic. So I'll replace the blue with light blue. And then let's see how that looks. That looks okay. For the plum, maybe I'll just do white, so it'll be a little more. Okay, that looks a little more generic for what we're doing here. So I'll just leave that like that. So I have my new pattern button. It doesn't actually do anything yet, so let's connect the new pattern button to the actual pattern. So I'll say pattern button dot mouse pressed, and that will call the pattern function. Oh, did I add an error? Oh, I misspelled pattern. Okay, so now I can update the pattern just by clicking the button instead of having to click the canvas, although they both work. Although we can just get rid of that now. So the user can see how to click the new pattern. And then let's add the save button as well. So I'll say variable save button is create button, save image. And I'll just say save button dot mouse pressed. And then we'll have to add a function here for the save image. So again, just reviewing. So before my function pattern, I'll just add a new function, save image. Whoops. And I'm just going to use the save function in P5, and I'm going to call this pattern.jpg. Or actually, let's use PNG since it's a better resolution. And you can really call that whatever you want if you want to change the name there. So now we can generate a new pattern and save the pattern as well. So if we save the pattern, we should see it in downloads. And there we go. So that's just an image. So it's not going to be interactive or anything like that, but we could use this pattern. I could use it as the background for my website or for the background in my Twitter page or something like that. So we can actually take the work that we're creating in the browser and move it outside of the browser for the user. So let's now actually give the user a little bit of control over some of the variation. So again, we can use different inputs for this. We can use a slider, we can use the button, we can use the text input if we want them to add some text. So let's give that a try. So what we want to do first is just identify different places where we could change what we see on the screen. So any number really we could update in here. So I'm just going to use I'm just going to go through a couple different numbers and then see how we could create a slider or a button to change that number. So we'll start here by looking at some of the stuff we tried in the example to see how it looks with our more complicated pattern. So to start, let's see if we can rotate these guys here. So we'll use the rotate button again. I'll just make a new button. Actually, let's put it before the pattern button. So we'll say var rotate button equals create button rotate. So then we can connect the rotate button to a function as well as a variable. So then we can connect the rotate button to a function and a variable as well. So we have the rotate button. So we need an angle for the rotation. So I'll say variable angle, we'll start at 0. And then we'll connect this rotate button to a function. So we'll say rotate button dot mouse pressed. And we'll have to create a new function for this. So we'll call it, I'll just call it rotate pattern. And we're just going to update that angle and then redraw our pattern. So our function rotate pattern. So angle, we'll just increment it a bit. We'll say 0 plus, I think like 0.5 was a good amount, times pi. And then we'll call pattern. So now we just have to look at where to implement the angle variable inside of our pattern. Oh, and I misspelled pattern, so let's change that. So here we have our self-portrait. And so we know we're going to need to push and pop. So we can do that after the fill. We can use the fill for everything. So we'll just do push. And we have X and Y, so we can translate there. So I'll say translates to XY, and then rotate by angle. Okay, and then so for XY, we need to replace those because now, since we're translating, now that origin point is different. So I'll do 0 and 0 there. I'll do 0 plus random 20, which is really just random 20. 0 minus 10 is really just negative 10. Another x minus 20, so that's really just negative 20. Y minus 10 is now just negative 10. So in each of these cases, x and y are just 0. So negative 10, and a lot of negative numbers. And then y plus 20 is 0 plus 20, which is just 20. Okay, so now, we're getting some weird stuff because we forgot to pop. So I did push, but I didn't pop, so it's not getting rid of those translations. So there we go. So now we have our regular scene, but now we can start to rotate our characters' heads in our pattern. So that kind of gives us some different effects. That's pretty cool. They're rotating by quite a lot. They're not rotating very slowly. So we could make the number smaller or bigger if we wanted to rotate more. But since it is the user who's doing the rotation, we might want to, control how much they're rotating by. So as we're rotating, we could also update some other stuff. We could just throw it in the same function. We could take another variable and just put it in there and rotate some other stuff. Let's see if there's anything obvious that we could rotate. Well, we could update this x plus 100 here. Just a variable right there. So in our function here, even though we're specifically saying we want to update this angle, there's no reason we can't update other variables. So why don't we take this 100, which is really telling us what the distance between these lines is going to be, and see what happens if we update that. So I'll make let's just call this column width. We'll just call it, column width. And we'll start that at 100. And then each time I rotate, I'll update that. So I'll say column width plus equals 5. So it's only going to go in one direction, which is a little bit of a disadvantage, but let's see how that looks. Okay, so now as we rotate, now our lines are starting to change, so we're seeing that pattern change as well. Eventually we're going to get to this point where this is going to be, a bigger part of our pattern, which is a little bit of a disadvantage. But the user is kind of seeing something different happen. So basically what's happening is that the distance between this line and the end of the line is just getting bigger as we go. And if we wanted to, we could just add another button to reset that. So we could try that. So we could say reset button. So after my rotate button, let's say reset equals create button, reset. Whoops. And then we'll just say reset dot mouse pressed, and we'll make a reset function. Okay, so for rotate, we're changing angle and column width. So for reset, we'll just set them back to what they originally were. Okay, so now we have two buttons that are controlling two different variables, but we could add variables. We could, we can use as many combinations of buttons and variables as we want. So the angle was 0, and the column width was 100. Okay, so if we try rotating a bit, okay, we can see our lines are moving, our characters are rotating. It's not everything is rotating, so we might want to update the name of this button. But we get some kind of interesting combinations of things. And then if we feel like, okay, we've gone too far, we can just reset. Oh, I think actually I can't use reset. It's probably a P5 function. So let's just call this reset rotation. So let me take reset and put that up here. Hopefully that'll work. Oh, actually, you know what it is? Okay, this is dumb of me. I named, it's not a P5 problem, but obviously I can't have a variable and a function with the same name. So that's why I was probably getting that error. So let's try it again. Let's do some rotations. Sorry, it's a lot of clicking. And then reset. Oh, but I didn't add the pattern there. So once we reset, we gotta also call the pattern so we can see that something changed. So now I'm gonna rotate, 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 and then reset. And then do it again. Okay, so just adding a couple buttons and kind of recreating some of the stuff we did in the demo. I'm also gonna just try adding some sliders to control different components in the screen. So I'll kind of start fresh for that because this demo will get really complicated if I'm just adding more and more stuff on top of each other. But you guys can really, you don't need to do like a ton of different stuff. Just take whatever variation you had in your original example and add a little bit to that. For example, what's the first number we come across is this 100. So if I change that 100, then it really changes the pattern. First of all, we get a lot more of our characters, but we also get a very different pattern in the background. So that's a really simple thing that the user could change, and all we really have to do is replace that number with a variable. So let's go with a slider for that one. That'll probably make the most sense. So I'll just call this variable, this is kind of like the width of each column. So maybe I'll call this the column slider, and then I'll just create that in setup. So it's really just one number. So I'm just going to say column slider equals create slider. And I can call this whatever I want. Let's call it, or actually no. So we have the create slider, and so we basically have to decide the minimum value. So that's sort of the minimum distance in between each x value, and then the maximum. So we started with 100. So we can go lower than that. Maybe we'll say 20 is the minimum, and then we can go a little higher than that as well. So we could say maybe 200 is the max. And then for the value where we start, we might as well use what we had before, which is 100. And then if I want, the default here is 1. And so I think for pixels, that's fine. I don't think I really need to change that. So we have our create slider. So now we just have to take this column slider and just replace this number with the column slider dot value. And then whatever the current value of that column slider is what's going to increase x. So really anywhere that we take a number, we throw a slider in there and we'll see the values change. So when I move the slider and then click new pattern, so if it's very high, okay, our pattern has fewer elements. If it's very low, then our pattern has a lot of elements. And so we might want to actually see things updating as we go. So what we can do is connect our pattern function to the slider as well. So I'll say column slider.input and then just call the pattern function there. So now every time I change the slider, I'm calling pattern, but I'm also changing this value as well. So let's try that. So now I can increase the size or I can decrease it. Okay, so we can get some very different effects in our design by changing that value. It's a little, with all the faces, it gets a little crazy over here. Maybe we should put the faces behind. Where's the faces? Okay, so I need better comments here. Wow. This is the face, and oh wait, no. Yeah, I guess this is my pattern, and this is my self-portrait. So let's try putting the pattern in front of the face. Oh, then that changes the face color as well. Oh, but it doesn't really make a difference because the faces that come later go over the pattern anyway. Anyway, we're not really trying to change the original pattern. We're just trying to change some components of it. So let's look for a couple more numbers that we can change of different types, and then that'll be good for the example. I'll let you guys kind of play with what you want to play with. So another example that we could do is the amount of green here. So we could change either the minimum or the maximum value of green. So let's try changing the max value of green. So let's do variable green slider. And so I'll just make a new slider. I'll say green slider here equals create slider. And the range for this is going to be pretty obvious because, well, we have green from 100 to 200. So if we go less than 100, that'll kind of change our range value. So we'll see a big change happen there, which we don't really want. So I'm just going to replace both of these numbers with the amount of green. So we'll take 0 as 0 amount of green to 255 is a lot of green, or the most possible green. And let's just start with 200, so it'll start with a lot of green. And then I'm also going to connect the green slider to the input, to the pattern, so we can see it updating as we change it. And so there's our green slider. One issue that we see already is that there's two sliders here and we don't really know which one does which. See, I have the two different sliders and there's no context for what they actually do. So let's add a little label right there. It doesn't actually have to say exactly what it does because it could be something abstract, but it's good to add a label just to give some context. So we can do that quickly. We don't need any variables or anything. I'm just going to use create P to create a paragraph. And just say this is the column width. So that just adds a little paragraph here. It's actually quite large. I'm just going to make a new style for the paragraph. Okay, so I have my paragraphs here. So let's take it out of there. I don't want that big font size. Okay, and I don't really want a margin either, so I'm just going to put my paragraph here, say margin is 0. Okay, and let's just give it the color is light blue. This might affect other parts of your website, but hopefully it won't. So now I can see that that's the column width, and then this slider is the green slider, so let's add a little label for that. So I'll say create P green color. So just something that explains what it does. It doesn't have to be, exactly. It could be something kind of abstract. And this actually isn't doing anything right now because we forgot to actually put that value in there. So let's take our green slider and scroll down. So here's our green value. So instead of that range, I'm just going to put the value of the green slider. So I'm going to say green slider dot value. And so it'll still be random, but it'll be random between 0 and whatever that is, this number. So we'll see, less and less green this way, so it's more red and blue, and more green that way. Okay, so we could obviously add that for all of the colors or for specific colors, or you could even plug in the hue or something like that if you wanted to change it. But we're still kind of restricting the color palette a little bit by only giving the user control over the green color. So you could kind of connect that to some idea in your scene. So, maybe if you were making a scene that was about the time of day, you could change the color of the sky or something like that. So you could connect it to something that's actually happening in your scene. This one is kind of just a bit random. So let's look at a couple other numbers we can change and then we'll be good. So here we have S, which I guess is the size. I really need better comments here. Size. So the size is random. Okay, so we could definitely make the size smaller or bigger. That's not super interesting at this point, so let's keep going. Oh, we could change the randomness in the eye offset. That might be kind of fun. Let's see what that looks like. So I'll create a slider, and I'll just call this eye slider. And then I'll make a new paragraph. I'll just say I. I'll leave it a little ambiguous as to what this does. So then I slider equals create slider. So the offset is just this like random number that I'm adding. It starts pretty small at 5. So let's leave 5 as the minimum and let's do like 50 as the maximum. And we'll start at 5. And then let's connect this to our pattern function as well. And then we just have to remember to take that I slider and plug in the value for that number. So I slider dot value. So it gets a little complicated when you have a lot of parentheses. But just remember, if you click in Sublime or most text editors, if you click on one of the parentheses, it'll show you where it connects. So these two parentheses connect. This one connects here with the random function. And this one connects all the way back here with the ellipse function. So if you have the right number of parentheses, the last one will connect. If you have like a thing like this, where this one doesn't connect anywhere, then you know you have an issue. Okay, so let's see if that actually makes a big difference. Oh, that's just the size of the eye. So the eye can be really small, or it can be really big. Okay, that's not as exciting as I thought it was going to be. I thought that was going to be the offset, which I guess is right here. Okay, so let's plug that in there instead. So doesn't really matter that much because this is just a number. We can plug it into any number we have. So let's try that now. So some of the eyes are moving away, but it's still a random number. So we don't see that happening quite as much. But then these eyes are all really close. So I guess that works. It's kind of interesting. It's a bit of a subtle effect. Let's try something with the pattern. So with the pattern, we have this random number for the Y. So maybe we can add in something there to make it a little more random. So the random number controls where these circles show up in the middle. So what we could do is we could add some randomness to what that value is. So let's add another slider, circle slider, and we'll add another label, create P circles, and circle slider equals create slider. So the values we were using 160 to 200. So there's only like 40 pixels in difference there. So I'm going to use that as a starting point. So let's say 40, and we'll go up to 200. And then we'll start at 40. And then I'll say circle slider dot input pattern. So kind of the same thing for each one. The main difference is this min, max, and starting range for each one of these sliders. So now instead of random 160, I'm going to use that slider. So I'm going to say 200 minus circle slider dot value. And so this is a little bit complicated, but essentially what I'm doing here is I'm saying 200 is like somewhere around here. And what I want is a range from here to here, but I want that range to get bigger. So if the number gets bigger, then the range will go this way. So I'm starting at this point, 200, and I'm subtracting the range this way and adding the range this way so that the area that these circles show up in can get bigger. So it looks kind of complicated, but we're just going to say 200 minus circle slider dot value to 200 plus circle slider dot value. Okay, so now if we change the circles, so we see a lot more randomness that way, versus here, they stay kind of in the middle. So again, it's a little bit arbitrary, but just different ways to kind of change what we see in the pattern, what the possibilities are. And so the user can kind of try different things, and then if they like something, they can save that. So they can change colors, they can change shapes, they can change sizes, positions, anything that has a number. Like there's a lot of other numbers in this design that I don't have sliders in, or other buttons or other changes. So think about other ways that you can update your pattern so that every time you see the pattern, you'll see some different variations. Okay, so I think that's enough examples. I kind of did a lot of sliders, but they're actually the easiest ones to use because you don't have to think too much about how to update them. We can just like change these numbers and you'll see bigger differences. So give that a try with your own pattern. Just choose something that you think would be interesting to make some variations with, and then try adding in the user interface components to implement that. If you do have any questions, obviously you can message me on Discord or email me or set up a Blackboard meeting if you want. So just let me know. And for the assignment, I'll go over that real quick. So basically, you can take the pattern that you made for the week 8 loop assignment. If you want to create a completely new pattern, you can do that as well. But I want you to start by just adding the save and generate pattern buttons like we have in this example. So the new pattern button and the save image button. So all of the all of the assignments should have that to start. So then style those buttons using some CSS. So we looked at how to do that in our first example. We updated a little bit in this example. You can see that there. And then finally, add some more variation to the pattern. So if you had like varying the size or the position in your first loop example, add like, a new variation.